Hey guys, John Paulamy here, Actionable Intelligence. Today we have a great guest, a guy that I have known for a little while, and I wanted to have him on, Larry Johnson. If you see him on the screen here, you probably have seen him around on the podcast circuit. He's basically, I'll read a little introduction for him, and then he can expand on it. Larry Johnson, he's a former CIA officer and intelligence analyst, and former planner and advisor at the U.S. State Department's Office of Counterterrorism. As an independent contractor, he has provided training for the U.S. military special operations community for 24 years. Since its founding in 1998, Larry has been managing partner of BERG, Business Exposure Reduction Group Associates LLC, which specializes in investigating money laundering, counterfeit products, as well as providing financial analysis and counter-terror strategy. So we wanted to have Larry on because he has been, over the years, very unbiased and critical of U.S. foreign policy, even going back to our wars in the Middle East. And so he is not a Johnny-come-lately, and he has some interesting things to say as a guy that's been plugged into the national security state in his previous career. And so having had several trips to Russia recently, talks to folks in Russia. So we want to get his perspective, especially now that the war looks like the special military operation seems to be culminating in Russia's favor, and a discussion about kind of where we're at right now and what things are looking like as this thing looks like it's kind of imploding. So, Larry, welcome. And if you want to add anything to your biography real quick, that's fine, or clarify anything. But I really would like to start with your current assessment of what things are looking like in general terms, because I know the geography is hard for some people, but
Right.
kind of where we're at right now, because the past doesn't really matter. People can go look that up. It's where we're at now and where we're heading. So if you can kind of give us like a quick couple minutes on where you think we are uh, with the situation on the
Sure.
ground, and then where we're heading.
Well, to quote Clausewitz, there are three critical variables that have to be taken into account: morale of the people, the military power of a country, and its economic power. And so, on every one of those, those three critical elements, Ukraine's failing. Um, they're we've got video after video of their press gangs going out, rounding people up, tackling them, uh, hog tying them, putting them in the back of a vehicle. That's a recruitment process. It's not like after the bombing of Pearl Harbor where guys were lined up in the United States out the door, couldn't wait to sign up. So they got a problem with manpower. Um, and militarily, the Russians really have accelerated the offensive. And there's been a lot of criticism of that, saying, oh, this shows how weak Russia is because they haven't done X, Y, and Z. Well, Russia has been fighting what's known as a special military operation, not a war. A war requires full mobilization. When you get full mobilization, that means they would have boosted their army to probably about 5 million, but they haven't done that. The only actual real mobilization they had took place in September 2022. An additional 320,000 reservists called up. Then since then, they've got the conscripts, people who are drafted, they come in, and contract soldiers, people who sign up voluntarily. And so over the course, the last 46 months, Russia has built up its force so that now it's got about 750,000 troops on the ground in Ukraine. Well, previously they didn't have that many. And it's not just, do we have enough guys to launch an attack and take this territory? Okay, once you do that, can you hold it? Do you have enough troops to be able to put in place that can hold it? And so that's what the Russian military planners have been contending with, that the West, clueless. I mean, retired generals and admirals, like Petraeus, Ben Hodges, Mark Kimmich, they're just idiots. They don't understand that. So now we've reached a point where has sufficient force, is pushing forward. But when you look on the economic side of the things, um, Ukraine's in complete collapse. Going back to in 2023, when basically Russia was able to shut down all traffic south of Zaporizhia going to the Odessa. So previously the Dnieper River was it's like the Mississippi River. About 20, 30%, 40% of of Ukraine's GDP was derived from products being shipped down that river and then being hauled out of ports in Odessa and such. They don't have that anymore. Uh, a significant amount of their wheat and barley is grown in the east, to the east of the river Dnieper. So, that's not getting out now like it used to. Uh, so we've seen that the debt to GDP ratio for Ukraine is now like they're anticipating it's going to be 136% for 2026. It's already well over 115. So they don't economically have the way to sustain this. And one of the other points Clausewitz made in his writings was most wars end because people run out of money, not because they lost at a big battle. And I actually think that's where we're headed here. There is, because the West is promising, oh, yeah, we got your back, Zelensky. Who, who in Europe would you bet put your life savings in with right now? All of them are, with maybe the exception of Hungary. Most of the European countries that are in NATO are doing very, very poorly economically, particularly Germany, France, and the UK. So their debt to GDP ratio keeps going up. So it'd be one thing if Ukraine had an outside benefactor that had unlimited supply of money and had an industrial base that could sustain them, but they don't. So, I think you're right. This thing's coming, it's like bankruptcy, slow, 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 then all of a sudden, boom. Uh, it's I think it very well could all be over by end of March, possibly sooner.
So we've seen in the news recently all of this, I call it frantic diplomatic activity, if you will.
Hmm.
I think has been, I think the President Trump, I think he was getting bad information from certain folks. Those folks seem to have been sidelined now, and somebody got to him and kind of clued him in what was really going on. I think a lot of people were critical of the president that he could have just he probably should have took the decision early on in the administration to put the blame on Biden and just shut this whole thing down.
Yeah,
It would
yeah,
have resolved itself. Then he could have just pointed at Biden, but he decided not to do that for whatever reason I'm not privy to. But now we have these frantic negotiations, this 28-point peace plan. And what I've noticed about this, and I'd like you to comment on anything specific, is we have the Europeans talking amongst themselves. We have the United States talking to the Europeans, trying to talk to the Russians, talking to the Ukrainians. And what I've noticed is there is no, I mean, I used to be when I was a working man, I was a big, high up in a labor union, and we had to negotiate with people. One of the things we've learned about negotiating is if I'm going into a negotiation with some other party, I need to understand at least what the other party is trying to achieve in the negotiation. Doesn't mean I have to agree with what they're trying to achieve. Doesn't mean that I have to give up everything, but at least
correct.
I should understand. And the Russians, what I've noticed since the beginning of the SMO, the President Putin, Lavrov, people in the Duma, spokesman, Peskov, everybody has been consistent. There are 4 or 5 major items that the Russians
Right,
require for this to end. And when I looked at the 28-point plan, I didn't see any of those items on the plan.
right.
And
Yeah,
so what suspect is going on, and you can comment on it, is we have the Europeans and the US all negotiating amongst themselves about how to lose this war without losing it.
right.
And nobody's considering the what the Russians' interests are that go back to perestroika, for heaven's sakes, in some cases, a security agreement that encompasses all of Europe, that takes in Russia's uh, uh, its needs and desires,
Yeah.
and some other things. So, can you comment on that? Because this whole thing looks like kabuki theater. It's just going to be another, excuse my expression, fart in the wind. I don't see it
Yeah.
doing anything.
I think the Russians view the West primarily like it's like trying to communicate with Helen Keller, deaf, dumb, and blind. They're not listening. As you correctly note, um, the the Russians have made repeated efforts to get along with the West. You know, under George H.W. Bush, Yeltsin said, "Hey, let us join NATO." West said, "Niet, oh, no, no, that's not happening." Same with Bill Clinton, with Putin, and with Yeltsin. Same with George W. Bush with Putin request. So repeatedly rebuffed. And then, the Russians have, their initial demand from March of 2022 was, hey, just ensure that the people in the Donbass can continue to speak Russian, can enjoy Russian culture, and the church will be protected. And you reduce your army to 85,000, and we'll leave your territory alone. We'll get along. That was the deal. And Boris Johnson, with Biden encouraging him, threatened him, if you guys sign this, you're on your own. So the war then shifted into a war. Uh, and so June 14th, 2024, Putin goes before the Russian Foreign Ministry and lays out. He says, look, we've had in September 2022, we had the elections in which the people of the Donbass, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia, they all voted to join the Russian Federation. So they're now republics in the Russian Federation. They ain't going back. They're now permanently part of us, just like Crimea is. It's been voted, it's enshrined in the Constitution, not changing. Second, NATO. Got to get NATO out. It's got to completely leave Ukrainian territory and recognize the Russian security demands. Third, the army, or the Ukrainian army, needs to be shrunk significantly. And the last agreement they had was with Ukraine tentatively was 85,000. So, somewhere in that vicinity. And last, there needs to be elections. And these neo-Nazis got to go. You got to ban the books. You're not allowed to preach Nazism. Okay. That was the deal in June of 2024. It's the June and August of 2025. It's still on the table today. That ain't changing. And that's the problem with Trump and these guys. They still think, oh, they don't mean it. Yeah, well, we'll meet them halfway. We'll let them keep two of the provinces and you get back the other two. Putin doesn't have that power. He doesn't have the legal authority to do that. That's what they don't understand. Makes, I just get infuriated at it.
The, you mentioned something there. I think something that I remind people of is the fact that there were referendums well, even before the SMO, there was a desire for the people in Lugansk and Donetsk to join the Russian Federation. I'm not going to go back into history with the anti-terrorist operations that the Kiev regime was doing there that caused the initial, there were people in the Ukrainian army who were Russian, ethnic Russians and speakers that created these militias like the Somali Brigade and some of these other folks
Right.
and went to war with the Ukrainian army. This is back in the teens of the last decade, 2010, 2012, 14, after the coup in
Maidan.
Maidan, yes. And so people don't understand this, and they basically had the Ukrainians over a barrel then and surrounded and had held their own. And so then this idea that I think that people just think that, well, the Russians woke up one day or Putin's girlfriend left one day and went on a shopping spree to Paris, so he got pissed off and decided to invade
Yeah.
Ukraine. This has been like marinating for decades. And so um, when you have recently been to Russia, you talk to high level Russian people. People can look at the videos. I've seen you talking to Maria Zakharova, you and Judge Napolitano. You had a really interesting conversation with General Aldanov, the guy that's in charge of the Akhmat Special Forces. Really a strong guy. I mean, he's like a real military guy that we used to have even too. I mean, he's at the front lines with his guys. He's a hero of
Yeah.
Russia. So you talk to people. I know you talk to other people in the Duma, other folks. When the Russians look at this, I mean, you sit. We're trying to be serious people here, I guess. They're wanting to have a negotiation. Who do we send? We have Dan Driscoll. We have Steve Witkoff, one of Trump's real estate buddies, and his son-in-law Jared Kushner. This is who we send there. No one that knows how to speak Russian. no one that has any Russian history, no one that knows anything. Just, hey, we're going to run our same playbook we ran in New York. We got to get a deal. We'll get a deal, and we're done. We're good. This is not what the Russians are looking for. So how are
Yeah.
the Russians looking at this? And they're like, what are we supposed to do here with this? We can't do anything. And then, yet they still have to maintain decorum and act like this is serious because they have pressure from China and Brazil and India, and this has got to end, guys. This is creating a lot of problems for everybody. So when you speak to folks when you were in Russia, what's the feedback you're getting about this?
Well, it has evolved with there's more, I'll say, optimism. At least they see Trump as offering a possible way out of this road to war. 2 years ago, I had a conversation, my first trip to Moscow in December of 2023, um, a brief conversation with Sergei Rybkov, the deputy foreign minister. Rybkov is always, he's supposed to be the potential replacement for Lavrov. He is, though, he's much more direct than Lavrov. And he said at the time, he says, we don't have anybody to talk to. He said, even during the height of the Cold War, we had people, there were lines of communication. It was communists and capitalists, but we were talking. We were even negotiating arms control agreements. He says, we don't have anybody to talk to now. So now they've got somebody to talk to. That's the positive. Uh, but as Putin said earlier, late last week, he was, I guess, at the CTSO, CSTO conference, he said, "Look, here's our negotiating team: uh, Lavrov, and then I forget the guy's name that was doing the direct talk with the Ukrainians in Turkey, but he's sort of a second tier guy, and then Ushakov, who's sort of a personal national security advisor to Putin." And Putin said all three, not just one, but all three. So they're looking for a formalized negotiating process. And as you correctly point out, between Jared Kushner and Witkoff and Driscoll, they've just been fed a diet of anti-Russian propaganda, and they're probably going to surprise to learn. God, you mean Putin's a Christian? I thought he was a communist, that kind of thing. Um, so the Russians keep politely reminding the United States, here are our five demands, those five critical demands. There's no compromise in that. I mean, the Trump mentality is there's compromise. And part of Trump's problem is, I say Scott Bessent in particular, but also Marco Rubio. Bessent, in light of his previous affiliation with George Soros, has been feeding this nonsense that, oh, all we got to do is apply a few more sanctions to Russia or embargo their oil, and they're going to collapse. Their economy is going to collapse, and they can't continue the war. Nonsense. I mean, you can recall back what Russia was like and Ukraine was like in 1991, 92, 93. It was a veritable shithole. The life expectancy declined. Uh, People were committing suicide. Uh, the unemployment was off the charts. You'd see, dead bodies littered the streets. And yet somehow both Russia and Ukraine survived that, but Russia came out much better than Ukraine, in part because, Putin got the oligarchs under control, and we're going to invest money in Russia, and we're not going to waste money in needless foreign wars. And we're going to start holding people accountable. So the rampant corruption that had existed before, they cracked down on it. Well, now you go to Moscow or St. Petersburg, and I've even been to some of the smaller cities outside. Man, clean, immaculate, safe, everything works. You're going, oh, this is how it's supposed to be.
I think that's exactly what's going on with propaganda and what we're fed in the West is, this vision of Russia circa 1991 or 92. And it was horrible. And a lot of the people there remember this. This is why Putin's so powerful and so popular, because I remember I read a book that somebody wrote. And look, at these levels, politicians at this level, leaders at this level, I mean, I wouldn't want to be one. They're
Yeah.
doing things, all of them, regardless. It's just what it is. to be in that level. But people don't have a real understanding. There's a couple movies people can watch. I'm not going to get into it now. I'll put it in the show notes, but kind of give you an insight of how things were. It was desperate there, very desperate. And I know that even in Ukraine, my family, uh, they went through two hyperinflations. You know, when the
Hmm.
Soviet Union collapsed, and then another one in the late '90s. So this economic deprivation was no hope. Like you said, alcoholism was rampant, drug abuse, women, there was a lot of prostitute, there was a lot of bad stuff going on. And so these people came along, Putin, and, things have improved greatly. So people are, and then people also don't understand, and I hate to say this, and I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but people should read Bill Browder's book, not because of the legislation he got, but when he describes when he was sent to Russia as a young analyst or a young guy when they were doing, he perfectly describes about how Western business interests came in there and investment firms and stuff and basically strip mined the place.
Hmm.
People didn't understand the voucher system. They would sell their apartments for $5,000 so they could stay in vodka for a year. I mean, it was really bad, and people took a lot of advantage, and there was a lot of animosity towards the government there, the Yeltsin government, and to the West with some of this shenanigans. And people didn't forget that. And so I want to get off that a little bit. I want to go back to, what we're talking about here. So we're in a situation now where people can continue to close their eyes like the Europeans, where the Russians will continue the special military. I've heard the president of the Russian Federation, many officials in Russia say the SMO will continue until all facets of it are achieved, which you've outlined what they are.
Right.
And so, okay, so if the Trump administration and the European Union folks are not going to even acknowledge that, then I think the Russians have said, and they are prepared now to go as far as that requires. And I think the first stop is probably, there's the Dnieper River. And I think my view is, and I want to get your opinion on what you think would happen. They, it's very easy now once Holy falls. There's no now that Pokrovsk has fallen, there is no fortifications between. There's all farmland basically between
Right.
those cities and those former. Basically, people don't understand. They spent over a decade and billions of dollars building these like Maginot Line uh, fortifications. Those have all been breached, and there's nothing between Zaporozhye city and Dnepropetrovsk, Dnepro city to between the Russians all the way to the river now. So I think the Russians are prepared to do that. You've seen Putin down. He was in Rostov. He was at the front recently. He's sending that message. He's wearing military camouflage. I mean, this is all
Right.
things people should understand. Gerasimov, the meetings they're having at the front. And so, I think if they do get to the river, there's going to be even more panic. And then I think the Russians probably say, this is your last chance. We're prepared to go all the way. I mean, are is it possible that they have to go all the way, into Western Ukraine to the Polish border to convince the people in the West that you're at some point you have to take this seriously? Uh, I mean, what do you think is likely? I think, before we even get to that, there'll also be some machinations probably internally in Ukraine. They're already, I heard Zelensky's back in Kiev.
Yeah.
Zelensky's probably
Yeah.
on his way out. You're starting to call the previous regime out now. So what are you sensing? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What do you think?
Yeah. This is if the negotiations with Witkoff, if the United States doesn't accept Russia's conditions, and I think it'll be impossible for Trump to accept it, politically, because the neocons still wield too much influence on both the Republican and Democrat side of the aisle, and so they will, but he will freeze. I think he'll freeze U.S. support, so it'll be sort of a kiss your sister moment.
Hmm.
And Putin's already made it clear, if we don't get this deal, the next deal is where our troops are, like Dnipropetrovsk, we'll give them the chance to also join the Russian Federation. And so what I anticipate will happen is militarily on the ground, the Russians will continue to advance. They will occupy all of Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, Sumy, and possibly Poltava. They'll also move down to Nikolaev and into Odessa. and they'll take it. I don't think they're going to go for Western Ukraine. Or if they did, the only way you would know that they were going to do that is they would have to mobilize about 5 million men, because you're going to have a multiple million man army to do that. Um, I think it is more likely that they will seize control of Kiev and have control of Odessa, and then there'll be another round of possible negotiations with the West. And at that point, I think both. I know Hungary's incentivized, but I think you'll see Romania possibly incentivized as, hey, we can get some of our territory back that we lost over the years. So, uh, all in all, I think the ultimate resolution is going to be militarily. Some have raised the prospect, this will unleash a guerrilla and insurgent war, the neo-Nazis. Okay, Russia's been there, done that, got the T-shirt. The Second Chechen War, which went on from 1999 to 2010, uh, yeah, they had bloody insurgency, and Russia won it. And what people don't want to look at. Go to Grozny, go to Chechnya today. It's amazing, and their people are devoted Russian nationalists, as is reflected with Kadyrov, Abdialudinov. Uh, they are Muslims, they are devout Muslims, but man, they're Russians. Ask Abdi, you go, Ya Russia,
No,
you
yeah,
know.
that was reflected in the interview. I mean, explained that basically the whole idea, which I think people should watch it just for that portion. He explains what it means to be part of the Russian Federation, why it's important. He even talks about it in Akhmat. It's not just Chechens, it's Russians, Buryats, all kinds of people,
Yeah,
over 70 types of people from all over Russia, that, put their Russian citizenship, their Russian statehood, what it means to be a Russian, which is totally foreign to an American or Western European mind.
right,
When you
right.
have when you listen to him, when he describes what it means creating a society, creating a world for your children and grandchildren, for your posterity, and how important that is, and that you have a duty to do that. And that's all across Russia. That's how people think. Their children are very important in Russia. The future of the children, everything is a lot of that is around that. So I think it's a different mindset. And I think we get into this situation in the West of like assuming that the other person, it's kind of like that Vietnam movie. I think it was I can't, Full Metal Jacket,
Oh yeah,
where that
yeah,
colonel says, inside of every gook is a American trying to get out. I mean, this is the mentality that we seem this chauvinistic mentality, this
yeah,
idea that we won the Cold War. Fukuyama said that's the end of history, and we don't need to listen to the Russians because we won the Cold War. So we're just going to, you're going to do what we say or else. And I think that, as the rise, I've argued this as the rise of the global South. This is not just a situation with Russia, but it applies to India and China
yeah, yeah,
and all these situations. 4 billion people in the global South and East who are on the rise. China, you could impose your will at one point, the Anglo-American, Atlanticist hegemon, whatever you want to call it, but that's waning for all the things that problems we have here. That's just a whole nother discussion. And these people are like, China's the second largest economy in the world stage. If some people say first already. And
yeah,
if you listen to people that go there like I do, I talk to many people. I mean, they're blowing our doors off. And it's like we will have a role in this world on the geopolitical stage. We're not just going to acquiesce to everything that the United States says going forward, because it's this history. This is how things evolve. So anyway, another thing I wanted to get into real quick, because we only have a short amount of time. You mentioned the neocons. You mentioned some specific names. As I said in the introduction, you used to be involved, or are still involved, I don't know, in investigating money laundering and counterfeit products and all this
sure.
stuff, and basically all this shenanigans that goes on. And I did see on another podcast or a news item mentioned that your business partner or you yourself, I can't remember, you can elaborate, um, has, has been given information or knows of information. It's going to hopefully come to light about how the whole money laundering thing works. That money goes to Ukraine and then it gets recycled back to EU officials, and even now it sounds like even politicians in the US.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could speak to on that, or if you.
Yeah, well,
Clarify that.
there's a massive fraud. So there's a difference between fraud and money laundering. Fraud means they're basically taking something from you. More often with money laundering, people are going to give you money because they want to figure a way to make it appear legitimate, so it passes through like trade-based money laundering. But in this case, what happened? The United States has given over $360 billion over the course of the last 4 years. At least 48 billion and perhaps more, but the documentation that was brought to my friend and former business partner detailed the amounts and how it moved. So the money was literally taken and then sent to run through banks in the Baltics, like Estonia, and then from there wound up in it was routed. So now you're doing what's called structuring, and you're trying to mask, hide, create shell companies. And it's at that point, since the theft of the money when it moved out of Ukraine, then from that point on, it is money laundering as they try to hide the origin of it. Um, so there's documentary evidence, there are bank records, there are depositions taken or affidavits filed by these whistleblowers, and that information has been turned over to both a U.S. attorney as well as the Criminal Investigative Division at the Pentagon or Department of War, whatever they're calling it now. Because there are at least 23 members of the U.S. Congress implicated in taking, and we're not talking a thousand, 2,000, we're talking millions of dollars. And the best way to figure out who those people are, just look at the ones who are the most vocal, talking in public about we got to support Ukraine. Keep that money flowing, rawhide. So the corruption's deep. When the story about the 100 million broke, that to me was a sign that they're preparing to jettison Zelensky because that's not even the tip of the iceberg. That's one flake of snow off 100 million in the context of 48 billion. You know, that's chump change.
Exactly. What do you see this actually coming to light, or will it, is that also a danger? I mean, the Russians
Yeah,
are pretty good at spy game and stuff too, and releasing things. I'm surprised they haven't to this point, really. I'm sure they've got the goods on a lot of people. But
yeah.
do you see this coming to light even in the U.S.? I mean, because this deep state, this whatever you want to call it, establishment, whatever people want to call it, it does seem to protect itself.
Yeah.
Is this something
Yeah.
that could actually, be prosecuted?
Well, it should be prosecuted, but I don't think it will be. I think they'll cover it up, just like they've covered up the Epstein files, just like they continue to cover up the Kennedy assassination. It's just you've got to protect particularly the amounts of money that are involved in this, and the various people that have they've gotten rich. So my motto has always been follow the money, and when you watch the lengths that people go to try to keep it quiet and keep it under wraps, that's where I think when they got Zelensky's chief advisor Yermak was shown the door the other day. If he's still alive by the end of next week, then that tells me for sure Zelensky's gone because Yermak's he's not going to take the fall for Zelensky.
Oh
He's
yeah.
going to talk. And he wants his own get out of jail free card. So they'll start turning on each other.
There's another thing I think that could happen. We've already seen Duma members, or not RADA members, I mean, get caught at the border with suitcases of cash, and the rats are starting to leave the ship. I'm
Yeah,
kind of interested to see when bringing Zaluzhny in, if this is going to be like, this is what the U.S. is famous for, like in Vietnam and Afghanistan, just change the leaders out, and then we'll pivot, and But Zelensky, I mean, this guy's a dead man walking. I mean, you mentioned earlier this idea of a civil guerrilla thing. There's going to be a lot of pissed off people in that leftover rump state in Western Ukraine with a lot of weapons and a lot of stolen money and wanting a lot of payback. I mean, when you say we're dealing with people that fully adopted the mentality of, well, I got to be careful because this is YouTube, 30s and 40s Germany
Hmm.
political ideologies, and they are pissed off, and they are. I think that's going to be very dangerous. And I think the FSB knows who these people are, and they'll handle it on their side. And so where will they turn? Who backstabbed us? Well, the EU and all. So this is going to have a lot of repercussions, this whole thing, when it finally collapses. But anyhow, I know you got to get to another call or meeting. I appreciate you coming on, and it's very insightful. And again, thanks a lot.
Well, let me make one other comment though about
Okay.
solutioning, because I think this is going to be problematic. The Russians say, "Hey," and you know the Russian mindset. They're very legalistic. They actually take these international agreements far more seriously than we do in the United States, and so they like to do it by the book. And so they don't. They want to make sure that whoever's elected, number one, goes through a formal election process in accordance with the Constitution of Ukraine, number one. But they're going to insist that they're not going to deal with anybody that comes out of, that uh, the 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 corporal with a mustache mentality and ideology. So uh, just if the United States brings Zelensky back and think, oh boy, we're going to install him and they'll make the Russians happy. Russians, they won't deal with him, and in part because he's more closely tied to those
Banderas.
groups,
Yeah. Yeah.
the right sector and others, than is Zelensky. So, that's like you're almost rubbing their face in it. So we're just gonna have to wait and see how the meeting's supposed to uh, end. Well, okay, the meeting with Witkoff's got to be over by now because it's almost 11 p.m. in Moscow.
Mm.
So it was a late afternoon meeting started, um, and Trump is supposed to come out and make an announcement here within the next hour. I don't know if it's going to be about Ukraine or Venezuela or something else, a new pet project. But the we're looking at the end is drawing nigh for the folks in Ukraine. I'll put it that way.
Exactly. All right. Well, again, appreciate you coming on. Appreciate your insight, and hopefully, maybe we get some major news in a month or two, and things radically change. We'll have you back on for some more insight. But again,
That'd be great,
appreciate it.
John.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you, man.